Welcome everyone to our LTP briefing that we have, which is live streamed. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone back. Everyone looks very refreshed. Look at this. Everyone's here. James is online. G'day, mate. How you doing up there? Good on you. So we'll start off with a karakia, please.
Takataka te hau ki te uru, tonga, kia rai, kina kina ki uta, kia ngā tara tara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, tiha, murray.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so Peter's coming up to tell us the next exciting instalment. Carry on where you left off, bud. The floor is yours.
Right. Now, we've got a series of presenters this morning, but the first thing we'll do is just recap where we were in December on the 13th when we last met. Russell will step us through the current rates position and also the draft financial strategy, which you haven't seen yet. That's quite a detailed document. Some of it's quite technical, but it does set out the overall parameters and levers for our financial approach to the LTP. And it is, of course, an underpinning document for the consultation document. John Philsill will talk to the Capital Endowment Fund, Bruce Rendell on property disposal, and then there's some administrative matters I'll talk to at the end. So that's a quick overview of the morning. I should remind you that there's this briefing and then another, and then we really are rolling into the adoption of the draft LTP. Now, I think that this is well known to everybody. We commenced the briefings in July. It's been a long road to get here. The focus on deliverability does come through in the capital program that you've seen a number of times now. What matters most was a breakthrough for us in the sense that we've never really done that level of sort of rigorous pre-engagement with the community before to understand what their choices and options are. And of course, the live streaming approach that we're doing today. There's been a lot of guidance during those briefings, but the key ones were around level of service review and the direction we received there. Rates increase, and above all, the deliverability of the capital program over time. We're currently working with Audit New Zealand. They're in the house. We have a large number of auditors in the house at the moment going through the FS, the IS, activity, asset plans, the capital program. They'll be providing advice to us when you meet to adopt the draft LTP on what they think of that work. At this stage, we are still aiming for 14th of February as the adoption date. There are still some matters up in the air, so look, that's plan A, and we'll move on from there. So I'm going to invite Lucky Russell, up to the table to step you through the rates position and then the financial strategy. Would you like me to fly this for you?
That'd be great, thanks, Peter.
Okay, cheers.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
Thanks for the intro, Peter. So this slide is the slide that was presented on the 13th of December, stepping out where we got to in projected rates position, where it was sitting, the CEO recommendations, which were later discussed, what that would look like, and then how that would be split between the base and the Te Kaha impact on the rates. 2/3 of the way down, you see the CCHL dividend reduction. So that was a point of discussion when we met in December. That has been confirmed, and that the dividend will be significantly reduced from CCHL for the plan. So that's has been signalled multiple times throughout the LTP discussions, but that's signalled particularly for the first year. That's an increase in rates, decreases over the following years, but that's an increase in rates, and the splitting is on the bottom between the 12.1 for the base and 2.7 from Te Kaha. So moving forward, where are we sitting? So we're sitting rates position without the increased dividend, sitting at 14.81. Of the CEO recommendations of the 2.1% I talked about just seconds ago, there were two items that we didn't discuss, which were held over to be considered, and they were relating to the Capital Endowment Fund. So they're sitting there, and in total they're about 1% a rates movement. So what the slide is showing is if those aren't taken, and there was some movement within the CapEx as far as inflation and timing, then the bottom line there is currently where the rates were sitting as at that time.
If you could call out the number that you're talking about, that would be helpful rather than bottom line, assuming.
Okay, the bottom line
Yep.
is where it says rates position, 15.82 for year 1, 8.16 for year 2, 4.36 for year 3, and 3.62 for the 27-28 year. Okay. Yep. Since then, as of Friday, the capital schedule is it's a moving document as well, and there's just been some changes in the timing of a number of projects, and there's been a slight increase there, 0.04%. So this slide is the last one on rates that I'll be talking about today. That's where matters are currently sitting as we stand. But like I say, we still do have the Capital Endowment Fund matters to discuss, and there's other amendments to come through as well. But that's the summary position of where we're sitting today. So with a base of 13.2 for year 1, then dropping down to 7 and 3.8 following years, and Te Kaha 2.7% in year 1 of the RTP, and then dropping down 1.2 and 0.4 in the following years. Okay. Happy to take any questions before we move on to the strategy, if that's...
Yeah, Councillor Templeton, please.
Thanks so much for that, and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Back. A couple of things. Firstly, the discrepancy between those figures that we had in December, the changes since December to the rates position and the capital program, and probably some OPEX too. Will we get some visibility over what those changes have been?
So we're talking about the 0.4% on that last sheet. Is that what we're referring to?
Yeah, the changes in the overall rates position from what we had in that December briefing, which was a 10.3 and a 5.2 for the following 2 years, and they're now much lower than that.
Where are you, Sarah?
So that was the 13, yeah. So
Yes.
But the ones that end up being the current position are different to that, and they're different in the financial strategy, in the draft.
Yeah, the draft financial strategy is based on the 15.82 position. Yep,
Yeah.
that's correct.
But then for the following 2 years, so just getting visibility of what those changes were in the capital program and those kind of things that you just talked about that have made the difference between those
I understand what you're saying.
percentages. Yeah.
Yes, good as gold.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be good.
Yep, for sure.
And the other one is on Te Kaha. And I know at the end of last year we discussed the fact that, and in I think the 6th of December briefing, it was clear that the Te Kaha pull-out, 2.7 was CapEx only. But when we discussed it at the final briefing, we discussed making sure that the whole of the Te Kaha thing was pulled out, because that had been separately consulted on for the finances, and that it was 3.5 including the OPEX. So if we're just super clear about that, so that we're talking about the core base, the core rise in rates plus Te Kaha, that we're taking 3.5 off, not just a 2.7.
Yes, you're quite correct.
Sense. Yeah,
Yeah, the 2.7 is the capital.
as the capital only.
Yes,
So we need
correct.
to just add in the OPEX there, so that we're
No.
we're clear on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
that's a good point.
That's it.
Okay, then what, Councillor McDonald?
Thank you. Two things. Do we have and you may be getting to it later, I just couldn't see it in the pack. Do we have a a value of the amendments in terms of what that would do either way to rates? So I've put a heap in for savings. I know others have probably put other ones in. Have we got a quantum yet on what they look like?
Not in total, no. So we've gone through from a rates impact on the amendments and looked at the individual items. So we haven't added all those up, but we could do, yeah.
But be useful when, at some stage.
Sure.
And just the other one, can you? And it's only just so I'm clear on Sarah's point, which is more than I don't recall it, but it's fair enough. Can you just confirm the operational costs in next year? I mean, if they're, what are they, 0.8% of rates, are they, on top of the capital? Is that what we're saying? I'm just trying to understand.
Yes, it's in that vicinity. Look, I'll confirm it and come back rather than trying to.
It would be good to come back with some detailed advice, because that seems,
For sure, yeah.
considering it's not open.
Councillor Kewen?
Yeah, just on the amendments, because I believe some people have put in more than one or two. If we could get a list of the savings ones, but also all the additional ones, and so we can kind of see the scale of, say, all the savings ones were taken and no additional ones went on, what that looks like versus no savings are made, like none of those get accepted and all the additional ones are added on, what that number looks like, because it could be quite scary.
For sure. And through you, Ms. Mayor, it's a good comment. So we'll come back with some analysis on what that could.
Luckily, retired people are getting a 15%.
So
increase in
potentially, just to clarify, we'll come back with advice to the councillor around the amendments. The amendments will be formally debated on the day that the draft goes. And so that's your time that you as councillors can put forward your amendment and debate it.
Just the reason for wanting a quantum, Mary, was that some councillors may wish to put their amendments off for a year or two once they see the quantum of, if they're all accepted, it could be, I mean, 15% is already an eye-watering number. So to then go out and, want to upgrade your car that year, it's not always the smartest spending in the house.
Okay, no more questions. I'll carry on. Sorry, Councillor Johansson.
We're gonna. I'm just mindful of all the craft and transport stuff that's all sort of up in the air. Is that being incorporated into this, or are we waiting to get more reports?
These numbers have been put together on what we know at the time. Okay.
All the craft projects now are sort of over budget, but we don't have the specifics around how we're going to respond.
Jane has got a response for you.
Question. There are some unknowns because of the time we are in the election cycle. So we're going with what we know now, but it will be more than likely that there will be changes between now, particularly with the transport stuff. We'll get the, what do you call it, NP, the National Policy Statement will come out first. Then there'll be the budget in May, and then between that and the final document, we will have to provide advice. There may likely be changes, and we're just waiting to see what the government does too with the RMA legislation. So there's nothing we can do about these things. So as Russell says, what you've got now is what we know now.
The only point of clarification I was trying to get was around like the craft transport projects that we've been told we can't deliver on budget. The budgets that we've got up here assume the current level of funding for craft. They don't take into account additional money that may be needed to do those.
So we will review that before the draft and make sure that that's correct. We haven't got the full information about that yet. We know that Transport have signalled something, but we actually haven't seen the detail of it yet.
Thank you. Right, no more question. We'll, Russell, carry on, please.
Okay, so I think just going back to Councillor Templeton's question on the movement between, I guess, in the latter years, talking about the 10.94 and how that went down to the 8.19. That's the movement in the impact of the movement and the dividend movement from CCHL. So you can see that there's a line there on that first sheet where it's got CCHL dividend, where we're moving to the enhanced status quo option, 3.54 increase in rates in year 1, and then a decrease of 2.75 in year 2, a decrease of 0.87 in year 3, and 1.46. So that's the difference between the numbers coming through. Okay, so I should have thought of that earlier. Okay.
Right. Financial stream.
Cool. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. So I'll just invite Neil Coll to the table. Neil's the acting head of finance. While I'm slightly wrong. So Neil's been front and centre in helping pull the financial strategy together. There's a number of aspects in here that we've already discussed and brought to council, but Neil will take us through the presentation. As Peter said, it's quite a detailed document, and in effect, the financial strategy comes together fairly much at the end of the process. It outlines how we're going to fund and our activities and plans and projects, and what that does to a number of aspects that can't really be finalised until all the budgets are finalised. Neil will cover that as well. So, yeah, over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Russell. Good morning. Yes, just to maybe proceed on that, if we refer to that third last bullet, it is just to stretch the fact that it is a live document. So any changes coming from your amendments to the capital program or the IS will influence the LTP financial model and subsequently the financial strategy. So it is a living document. So the purpose of the financial strategy is to provide a prudent and cost-effective approach to funding these assets, facilities and services that we do provide, and the tools we use to achieve those outcomes. It is required by the LGA, and there are specific requirements from the LGA as well as to what we need to get out of that financial strategy, what visibility, what's the plan, etc. It's also part of the Council's LTP letter of expectation to provide this financial strategy, and it is subject to audit. We have elected this year to proceed in getting it audited as the councils were given a choice. Just a part of the assurance process, it's also been reviewed by all of the ELT and the heads of service. I'm going to go into a couple of the key metrics in the detailed financial strategy. So the first one refers to the debt headroom. This is the amount that council can borrow before reaching its debt limit. And the debt limit is what we require to have the ability to borrow in response to a natural disaster event. So as you can see on that graph, we are well above the minimum of 650 million set for this LTP period.
So just on that, it had been 400 million in the previous year, but doing the analysis and looking at what the minimum would be required should an event hit, we're proposing to increase that to 600 million, as Neil said. But as you can see, so that's the red line going through on the bottom, but our capacity is significantly more than that. So we're well within. So.
I'm just quickly going to jump a slide and come back to the average rate increase. So the treasury metrics, those two metrics that we can see there, the projected net interest to rates ratio as well as the net interest to revenue ratio, is two ratios that are both debt affordability indicators, and these limits are set by the LGFA. The LGFA is Council's biggest source of debt funding. So as you can see there, we are also well under the limit set by the LGFA, with the net interest to rates ratio just over 10% with regards to the limit of 30%, and the net interest staying under 10% as well to the 20% limit. So if you go back to the average rates increase, as Russell mentioned earlier, currently we're proposing a rates increase of 15.86% for the 24-25 period, and we're estimating this will decrease to 0.88% over the 10-year LTP period, as mentioned, as the capital program and the IS
change, these figures could change as well. Yeah. So it's estimated that this will still enable us to deliver the capital investment program, prioritise infrastructure whilst accommodating debt repayments. Any questions?
I guess there's a number of factors in that why the rates are coming down, and you know, the comment was made that we looked at this and it was not a dissimilar graph as we'd seen before, but looking at it this time, why has it come down? Because two main reasons. One is the cost of te kaha is gathered in the rates, so we're not increasing it further by then, and also the CCHL dividend has been a decrease in year one, but then that picks up and increases over the following years. So that's why that. And also remember that this is the level of increase. So this isn't the level of rates. This is the level of increase on the rates that's being discussed. Yep.
Okay, Councillor Moore.
Thank you. When looking through the capital program and sort of between those years 2028 and 2034, a lot of wards have got 0 transport projects, for example, or in many cases capital projects. So I'm trying to figure out, in the context of a long-term plan, is that the norm, that there's basically almost no projects in there for those final few years? Of course there will be when that time comes, but they're not in there and budgeted now. So I'm just concerned that those numbers look artificially low, whereas in reality you're going to have all these capital projects that need to be done that haven't necessarily been included as part of a long-term plan. So some will have noticed in the awards, for example, there's nothing between 2028 and 2034, which seems unusual. So we're looking at artificially low numbers is what I'm trying to get my head around.
Look, I'm probably not the best person, or we're not the best people to comment on the capital program, but there is significant work being done in that space to ensure that there is equity across the years, and so that we can meet what we need to meet so far as growth and maintaining our levels of service and our affordability marks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as for specific years and lack of projects, we need someone else to sort of step in.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm talking about half the years of long-term plan, like in terms of growth, 3,500 homes to go in halls when there's no transport projects between 2028 and 2034, which of course there will be, but we're not budgeting for them at this point in time. So how do we look at that and think it's...
When you get that far out in the annual plan, it's very difficult to peg which projects on a ward view are going to be actually delivered in any particular year, and that funding is provided at a program level, citywide level. So as we get towards those years, sort of up to 3 years in advance, the business goes through and is actually drawing down and prioritising based on where the needs and priorities are under asset management plans. And that's where you see the ward level detail turning up on individual projects or delivery packages.
In the last long-term plan, as I recall it, there was quite a number of projects still in those later years in the long-term plan. I'm just wondering if we have an idea on the difference of what sort of capital projects were budgeted for those final few years and this long-term plan compared to the last long-term plan, because they seem quite different. I could be very, very wrong, but that's just been an observation I'm trying to get my head around.
But that would need some further analysis as to the difference between those versions. But as a general approach, those outer years are budgeted at a higher level based on the asset projections for the most part, and growth as well. And then you've only got a handful of specific projects that are visible in those outer years. But you'll see the level of funding is actually quite similar in those outer years in total.
Okay.
Gotcha. If I could just add a comment, it may be that we can revisit some of this question, Councillor Moore, next week when you see the infrastructure strategy. That gives you more of a sense as to where the investment is going to lie over the next 30 years. So can we pick it up then?
Gotcha. Nice one. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cotter, please. That'll be you.
Just wondering, looking at basically from 2028 on, we're potentially aiming for a rate increase below inflation. If you're looking at inflation, maybe heading down towards 3%. Do we have a policy about whether we set an increase at least above inflation every year? And do you think it's prudent that we should set an increase below inflation? And are you the right person to ask that question to? I'm quite happy to park that if you want to, but I'm just noting it really. It's a bit of a concern.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, we shouldn't be budgeting lower than inflation. I'll have a look at that. But we do take into account the cost to council across the years and what that's likely to be. Going that far out, it is difficult to assess at this point what that will be. And the mix, I guess, inflation on the different aspects of the program. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, good. Councillor Kewen, please.
Yeah, so on your modelling on borrowing and stuff like that, it's obviously all at today's dollars and not inflation adjusted, because in 30 years time, $1 million isn't going to get you much more than a metre of pipe type thing. So why does that A not change, and then B, when interest rate changes on the other one, does the amount you can pay back, does that not become an issue? Like to just have broad numbers where you go, you're allowed to borrow up to that, but you might have borrowed $100 million, but if the interest rate's doubled, your payback capacity's changed considerably, yet that model doesn't change. Why is that?
It's a factor, like the affordability is a factor on the rates revenue. So if the costs are going up, then the rates go up to fund that. So therefore, that's a percentage of how that has come. So it's not going, one's not going to go up in isolation to the other. If they're going to move together. This is saying is they're pretty much sticking together. As rates go up, then the costs go up. So it's not going up in a greater proportion. Yeah.
So probably another way to ask it is, let's say interest rates went horrendous like they did once in the 80s, where they went, the mortgage was 20-something percent. If we're borrowing at 20%, are we still allowed to just keep borrowing? Or is there no rules on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again,
because rates would have to go up horrendously to pay for it.
Exactly, and so like this is looking at what we know now, and we're not factoring in 20% increases or anything of that nature. It's what we know now, what the expectation is now, looking forward, and how that will be funded. And no, what we're not saying is go out and borrow because we've got heaps of capacity. We're not saying that at all. We're saying where we're currently sitting, then we are within the covenant matrix that we have. Generally, we follow the LGFA because it's mainly where we borrow our funds. The Act doesn't specify any limits or anything that we have to have, but best practice is, and so that's what we're following. What we're saying here is at the moment, as we're sitting, we are within those covenants.
And I think you answered it in the first one where you said we can just put rates up. Like in a household, if you've got a limited income for the year, you go to the bank and say, I want some more money. They say, no, because you can't pay it back. Whereas the council, our borrowers go, yeah, go for it, because you can just put rates up.
Well, that's right. That's the funding mechanism. But I mean, that's a different discussion, isn't it? We can't just put them up. It's a discussion with the community as to it.
Councillor Henstock, please.
Thank you. Can you please bring up the slide on the average rates increase? Yeah, that one there. The issue I've got is around the confidence in those projections. I mean, it's pleasing to see that the increase is decreasing over the 10-year period. I picked up on an under-the-breath comment from my colleague, Councillor Kewen over there, that 10 years ago we also predicted that it would be decreasing like that. So if that is the case, what are we doing differently? And to give us confidence that these projections are correct, because if our ratepayers can see this and say, oh yeah, but that's what you told us 10 years ago and it hasn't eventuated, it's the issue that I'm really struggling with at the moment. So I'd like to understand, what confidence we've got and what we're doing differently.
Okay, yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great question. How can they be going down to such an extent? So, as I said at the start when we presented the updated rates position on where it was and the decrease in the level of dividend from CCHL, looking at the latter years, that is increasing. So initial figures that we've got, we're still working through them, but the level of dividend that we're getting from CCHL is going up. So that's partly offsetting what the rates are going looking at. Also, where we're looking at periods of much lower inflation, much lower interest rates. Now, as we know, that can change on a dime, as we've just seen not so long ago. But that's our projection at the moment. So those factors and the level of growth that we have coming through as well is a significant factor for council, extra ratepayers coming through.
So thank you. I appreciate the extenuating circumstances at the moment in relation to kaha and the reducing dividend and the inflation and insurance costs, etc. You mentioned that the level of dividend is going up. I haven't quite got my head around that, having just sat through a year of a strategic review around our assets. And again, I have yet to be convinced about the viability of that. Maybe that's a conversation for later, but yeah, I don't have that same level of confidence having sat through that review at this moment.
Right. Councillor Harrison-Hunt, please.
Kia ora, guys. Just have a question in regards to those projected rates there. And I've got a bit of a shtick. Reason being is Riccarton has zero budget for the next 10 years in corporate services, people and communities, and parks and heritage. And I got told, just wanted some clarity, that because there's zero budgeted because some Riccarton projects haven't been moved over from the Metro budget. Could I play Mythbuster here and see if that's correct across other wards? Or is it just because none of the Metro budgets have been moved over? Because it looks like there isn't any capital projects within 28 going into 34. There's barely any in Riccarton. And I'm wondering if that goes across the city.
So we're probably getting into a level of detail that I'm not able to answer. Sorry, Councillor. We'll have to come back to you on that. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine, Russ. Cheers.
Councillor Coker, please.
With that reduced CCHL dividend, are you talking back and forth with CCHL to see if, they'd assume that they'd have to borrow to keep the dividends the same, and so that's why we're reducing it. But are you going back and forth and seeing if that's actually the case? Because things will change over time, as we know.
We're working very hard to have that conversation with CCHL, and so we are having good conversation with CCHL. But at this stage, that's what it's looking like. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Barber, please.
Thanks, Russell. Probably a bit of a difficult question. Is there a sort of a Canterbury-centric metric that measures the affordability of rates for the local population and its movement over the years? Is there anything like that?
Yes, that's a good. I'm not. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not aware of anything that's. I guess Stats New Zealand would put out a lot of information. Whether you can hone that in to be across Canterbury, possibly could. You look at the component of rates sitting in the CPI, and it's about 7%, and it's been that way for some time. That's just not Canterbury. So. That would say it's not increasing out of hand, but individual councils will see, rates moving at different spaces. So, and so far as I guess when we look at the couple of the slides that Neil put up just on the rates affordability, other councils will have those same metrics that they're reporting against. But I'm not aware of anything done sort of Canterbury wide.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Carry on, please.
That's pretty much us on the strategy. Like Neil has outlined, there's still some work being done in it until budgets are finalised. It won't be complete. We're working with audit now on a version going through. There'll be changes coming through from the things we've spoken about today and from the amendments when they are finalised. So once that's done, the document itself will be completed. But if there's any further questions that come to mind, then please send them through. We're happy to get a response.
So just to be clear from my mind, Russell, this is the number as we look at the moment. There's a heap of amendments floating around, some which save a little bit, some that add a little bit. They are not in this number.
That is quite correct.
Good. So this is where we've got to be sensible and say, well, if we want to put lots more in, it'll go up. If we want to take some out, it'll go down. So that's up to us from today forward.
Correct.
Thank you. Yeah, when I talk us, I'm talking us. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Neil.
Greetings. Far away.
Thank you all. Peter and I are here to talk about the Capital Endowment Fund and some contestable community funding considerations. I'll kick off with a little bit of background from the Capital Endowment Fund and then pass on to Peter, who'll do some more of the detail. As you probably know, in the year 2000, Orion New Zealand sold its North Island gas network. The council share was used for debt reduction and invested in the Capital Endowment Fund. As council, we make decisions on that and we see the policy and we know what sort of projects that it supports, from multicultural centres to rangers to the restoration of heritage buildings, numerous uses, the Pukeko centres, the Woolston brass bands, and so forth. I think we're quite familiar with that. Probably not so familiar with the mechanics of the fund, and I'll ask Peter to talk about those now.
Thanks, John. So the post-earthquake, I guess before the earthquakes, it made a lot of sense to have this fund. We didn't have nearly as much debt. Could say we were almost cashed up. And so it made sense to have this as a ring-fenced fund. We're now in the situation where we're trending over $2.5 billion of debt. And year one, that's modelling at 5.5% of interest costs. And of course, the ratepayers bear the cost of debt repayment principal and interest. But the Capital Endowment Fund is allocated deposit rates at around 4.3. So you've got an interest differential there, which equates to about $1.2 million in year one. Effectively, we've increased borrowing to sustain this fund. You could look at it like being quite happy that you've got a term deposit at 4%, but you've got a big mortgage on your house still. You're not really moving forward as fast as you could be. So just to put it in everyday parlance there. So part of the proposition here is that, or proposal is that the fund be collapsed, offset against debt. And John's going to speak to some of the other options of the go-forward funding that has been applied from this fund.
Thanks, Peter. Peter's covered the financial side. From what I see of our finance team, moving these monies around, requires administrative work, and we are overcomplicating. That's my layman's version. So, getting straight down to options for the council to consider, what we'd like to do is go through these options, offer some explanations, and then invite our elected members to make any comments or questions. So the options, the first tranche, if you like, are winding up the fund. So we wind up the fund. Out of the fund, there are two types of grants that are paid. Permanent grants, about $1.6 million a year, and then council allocated grants. We call it the unallocated balance. Right at the moment, that's sitting at about $2.6 million a year, but it does fluctuate according to the interest rate we get from the deposit. So the first option is cease all permanent grants and cease all council allocated grants. Permanent grants will have a saving of $1.6 million a year. Unallocated grants, a saving of $2.6 million a year. Add that to the saving from the differential in borrowing rates, and it mounts up. However, there are risks. The implications of ceasing permanent grants. These permanent grants largely go to Christchurch NZ. They're used for economic development initiatives and funding events. Christchurch NZ, we've talked to them about this, see this as core funding. It's part of council's core funding, and if this is removed, things will go. Existing commitments will not be able to be made, and there will be service cuts. Exactly what they would probably be a matter for Christchurch NZ to explain, but there would be implications. Again, the implications are if you cut council allocated grants, they would include an inability to respond to emerging priorities, a significant reduction in support to the community volunteer sector, which is a sector most often in need. And if councillors kind of examine the grants they've made from the Capital Endowment Fund over the last couple of years, it becomes apparent to see what sort of organisations would be impacted. So that's option one, cease all the grants, wind up the fund. Option two is to rate for a proportion of the grants. The permanent grants and council allocated grants. So, for example, if you rated for 100% of the grants, it would cost you $1.6 million a year. If you rated for the 100% of the council allocated grants, it would cost the same. You could rate for a proportion. You could rate for 50%, 75%, 25%. The amount is for council. The benefits of that is there would be a saving. The benefits of that is the council can decide exactly what it would like to grant and what it wouldn't. So the savings can be balanced with the impact on community. The third option is rate for grants at historic levels. Then the saving will be limited to the efficiencies incurred by closing the fund. So three options. Wind up the fund, cease all grants, pay some grants, keep grants at historic levels. The different option, the different level of saving. Ooh. Sorry. The second tranche of options, if you like, are Capital Endowment Fund. You keep the fund as it is. And these options will be familiar to councillors because we discussed them in the annual plan earlier this year. Apply uncommitted Capital Endowment Fund proceeds to offset rate-funded grants for 3 years. If you apply them all, you'll get a $2.6 million saving per annum for 3 years. Apply 50% of proceeds. I think council decided to do that with the annual plan. The saving $1.3 million for 3 years. Another option might be to reduce the permanent grants for 3 years. Again, the more you reduce, the greater the saving. The fourth option, which I haven't put there and I do apologise, is to maintain the status quo, in which case there'll be no changes to level of service and no savings. Status quo, you keep the fund and keep the current grants level. Peter and I can pause here and answer questions on the Capital Endowment Fund, or we can move to contestable and do them at the end.
We'll start. Yep, Councillor Cotter, please.
So first question is, why are we only receiving 4.3% when you can actually receive over 6% now in the market? And that's my first question. And the second question is, so could we please have a rates impact of these numbers that you're giving us as well would be helpful.
So as I mentioned earlier, that most of the fund is actually borrowed internally.
When you're saying that you'll save...
So we fund it ourselves rather than incur the higher external debt for some of the rebuild. So the fund is actually around 75% of it, I think, is invested internally. So it's really...
So we're actually saving by borrowing from the CEF at 4.3.
I guess the thing to appreciate
we're saving ourselves an interest cost there of 1.2 as well, aren't we?
We're borrowing at a higher rate than we're allocating to the Capital Endowment Fund, and then we use that interest that's allocated to the Capital Endowment Fund for these allocations. So it's actually costing us 5.5% in the next year.
Is the fund
to provide 4.3% to the fund to have non-rates funded allocations.
So it's not there at all, the capital endowment money?
It's not a separate pot of gold. It's internal borrowing. It was, but that was pre-quake.
Yeah.
There's a lot of difference in the subsequent 13 years.
Right.
And Pauline, we can supply rates calculations. I guess we work on the, was it 6.5 million per 1%?
The earlier tables showed those two lines around, I think it was 0.77 for the Capital Endowment Fund and 0.1 something for the Contestable Fund recommendations, but whatever you decide will be a range between 0 and that.
Yes.
So so any individual options we can get a more granular calculation.
Yes. Okay.
Councillor McLellan, please.
So the long and short of it is we're 1.2 million better off annually, regardless of what we do. If we do nothing and maintain this, the council allocated and the permanent granted. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. My question is, if we go back a slide, rate grants at historic levels, if we were of a mind to bank the 1.2, continue doing what we always do, is there any way to entrench that idea, or are we not leaving ourselves at risk of, if we collapse the Capital Endowment Fund, we're now subject to grant decisions being changed essentially on an annual basis? And the composition of council can change obviously as well.
Councillor, I think that's a question that we'd like to get back to you about, because it may involve rules about quorums and majorities and things. We're just not able to answer that right at the moment.
Okay, you can see my concern, which is I want the 1.2, but I don't want to do something that makes it easy to cut community funding over the long term.
I'd like to say something, but I'm not sure. So I think out of respect, we need to get back to you.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Templeton.
Thanks so much for this. I think probably the key thing I'd say in this is normally this scale of change would be something that's subject to a full report to council with all of the details and those kind of things. And this is a bit too high level for me when it comes to the financial information and those kind of things to be able to make a call on it, if that makes sense. One thing I'd like to see is, for example, the difference between what's proposed and if we collapsed the Capital Endowment Fund but still wanted to do the grants to CNZ and to our community groups, what that looks like funded from rates, for example, as opposed to from the Capital Endowment Fund, which is partly rates funded and stuff with the interest rates. Those kind of things, and I think that the financial information here is too high level to make a big decision like this. Yeah.
Councillor Harrison-Hunt.
No, I agree with Sarah. I was about to say the same. It's just gone whoosh. But the next question, just for clarification, is it's $6.5 million for 1% OPEX. Is that correct?
thereabouts.
Where we're standing at the moment, currently standing.
6 point.
Yeah, OPEX.
Just a little bit, that this is not a decision-making meeting, this is
No.
just to give
Yeah, of
guidance
course.
to the chaps at the end, so carry on. Sorry, carry on, Kyle.
Yeah, no, I think just for feedback, I think a deeper look into this would be really beneficial. And I really appreciate you coming to us with this. Thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Coker. Done? Happy? Councillor Johansson.
Yeah, I guess I was quite interested in just understanding when the fund was set up, there was percentages and there was percentages of where the money should go, and I'm just wondering if we're going to get an understanding of what's actually happened in terms of meeting those objectives.
That's a question that's not conceived or covered by this. If that's a request of the council, we need a separate report.
I mean, I think what was interesting when it was set up, when we did consult the community over how we should spend the money, most people wanted to go into civic and community, but council decided to give most to economic. So over the time, I'd be quite interested in understanding if the fund is primarily being used for the economic and ongoing operational costs for Christchurch and Z or their predecessor versus actually going into community projects. The other thing that I'd be quite keen to understand is with our own strengthening communities funding, there's quite a few limitations on people being able to access capital for like building, for example. So if we were to get rid of it, does that then mean that we need to consider other policy changes so that if we wanted to support, I don't know, the bridge in South Brighton or the Wolfston Brass Band or whatever, that there was an ability for us to support those those sorts of requests?
Thanks, John.
Hearing the tenor of the observations and questions, I think Peter and I would like to emphasise, if you like, there's two parts to this presentation. One, the inherent efficiency of getting rid of the borrowing mechanism that is the Capital Endowment Fund. Two, how the proceeds are allocated. They can be separate decisions in that the Capital Endowment Fund can be wind up and that borrowing mechanism can be ended, and the council can continue funding everything previously covered by the Capital Endowment Fund through rates at no change to eligibility, levels of service. It's just a slightly more efficient way of doing that. We are looking at the mechanics of the fund and what council may choose to fund, so they can be different questions. They are different questions.
Put too fine a point on it. It's going to save you a lot of admin for lending out money you haven't got to people who will never pay interest. It's an absolute nightmare as far as admin goes. But if we decide to rate for these contestable, or these funds that the CF goes to, we can still do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That we could remove the borrowing mechanism but not wind up the fund, which is the option that I would support.
But the fund's got nothing in it, has it, John?
Well, it is, but it's supported by council's debt. That
So it's got nothing in it.
we repay.
Yeah, so out of the 75, if I went to look at the account for CEF, what's it got? I know you're borrowing it. What are you?
Currently, it's got 104 million, so 75 was the initial allocation from the proceeds from Orion.
Mm-hmm.
So the current balance, which is reported in every annual plan and annual report, is 104 million of base. The interest allocation covers these items, so about 4 and change. So the interest that's allocated to it, 4.3% on 100 million. And so it's just a bit of a financial roundabout,
it's a lot,
reflecting the internal borrowing. So it's all it's the majority of it's internal. There is some external deposit.
There's a lot simpler, tidier way of doing it than what we're doing it at the moment to still end up with the same result.
It's the decision making as to what you support.
What I don't get though is if we're borrowing off ourselves, if we didn't do that, we would save the 1.2. So it's not like the point I'm missing is like, in the old days when interest rates were relatively low, it made sense. Now it doesn't make sense because of what's happened with high interest rates. But that doesn't, I don't understand why that links to getting rid of the fund and not just borrowing like we normally would.
Okay.
Well, it was more in terms of, as mentioned, pre-quake, we were in a very healthy financial position and our debt was way lower. I haven't got the absolute values, it was a while ago now. So it made some sense that it was a separate fund. Normally when you're allocating these special purpose funds is you actually have funds to do that out of. When you're borrowing to support that, it's not as efficient financially.
So just for me, way back in the day when I wasn't here, the money, whatever it was put in a bank account and we only ever spent the interest. Is that how it worked? And then the earthquake come along and said, oh, we need this, so we did it, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Cotter again. Please.
Yeah, sorry, I'm finding this really difficult because originally when it was set up, the distribution amounts was only supposed to be from the interest gained on the fund, less the inflation proofing of that. So why have we not tailored that down to what we receive out of it now? Like if we're not receiving anything,
no, we
shouldn't be
still
distributing
allocate
anything.
But we still allocate interest to the fund. It's mostly from internal borrowing as opposed to external deposit receipts. Yeah. And that is where the monies are allocated from. So you'll see that if you find that in the annual report, you'll see that the interest comes in, the allocations are made, the closing balance is there, 104. So that mechanism is still working. It's just mostly done internally.
Yes, I know, but what I'm saying is that you're basically telling us it's running at a loss. Is that correct?
Well, it's inefficient at a total council viewpoint.
But is it
the fund itself is not.
Running at a loss?
The fund itself is not, because it's allocated interest, but the interest it's allocated is costing us more.
Yep. So we could tweak the numbers, that the amount that we distribute out of it then to make it more viable. My concern is that when interest rates on deposits pick up again, and if we get rid of this, then it has repercussions as well. And my other question is going back to the policy. There was a link in the briefing there that when council tweaked it after the quakes to not inflation proof that distribution for 1 or 2 years, they required 80% of the vote around the table at the time. Would this also require that?
That relates to Councillor McClellan's earlier question, which I said I needed to go back and find a little bit more information.
And also just on that, I agree with Councillor Templeton. I think this needs a more of a detailed report. I'm not comfortable with the way this is. It's very difficult to follow, and it does need an applicable rating implication per dollar value so that we know what we're talking about. So I think something better.
So we suggest we come back with some more information in plain language and potentially using examples and diagrams to explain it. So we'll come back with some...
And particularly supporting Councillor Johansson's point too, that if we ended up with just all funds applying to strengthening communities, then that doesn't fund capital, which the Capital Endowment Fund does.
Okay, moving right along, we've got two left, Councillor Fields and Councillor Templeton. And then Councillor Scandal. Oh yes, I got you up there, yeah.
I'm just assuming that the thing that will save us the most money, and I'm just guessing here, is winding it up, right? Just in pure, simple terms. Would that be right, or is it not that cut and dried? Yep, good. I mean, in theory, if we did wind up the fund, there's nothing to stop us in a few years re-establishing a similar fund by selling something and re-establishing it in the way that it was established in the first place, right? Theoretically.
Feasible.
Again, probably outside the scope of this proposal and this briefing.
But I mean, it was established through selling something and establishing the fund, so presumably a rinse and repeat would be a way to re-establish it if we ever wanted to do that, right? If we wound it up. Oh, that's not what I'm asking. Yeah. I'm just asking if that was the mechanism.
Good question. Carry on. And
again, a cautious yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. When you come back with additional information, I mean, while diagrams and flowcharts and plain language and stuff will be useful, I think that it's that more detailed financial information that some of us will be really looking for. And one of those things should be an option if it's the debt and the interest rates and things at the moment that are making some of that difference. What happens when interest rates drop? So a discussion about that. But also, could we? Is it worth prioritising debt repayment to the fund in the short to medium term, and would that make a difference? So that kind of information coming back to us. Yeah, thanks.
And lastly, Councillor Scandrick.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't expect answers today, but just some thoughts. With regards to the fund, is anything funded on this with regards to that have previously been funded by government agencies? So you don't have to answer it now. So have we picked up funding from something that has been stopped? The second part to that is, was anything set up over COVID that was designed for COVID by government that was stopped, and we've picked up that funding and they're taking funding from this? I'm just thinking of those 2 points because, you know, we don't fund schools and certain things because we see that as government funding. So just those two. Thirdly, with regards to heritage grants, in England, the National Heritage Trust was very, very strict and to save buildings, etc. But they were so strict that no one was touching heritage buildings because they're too strenuous, too expensive. That has really changed in Britain now, hugely, and now people are picking up these buildings because there's a lot more leeway and movement and understanding of the costs, and that is saving buildings and making it cheaper. Do we cut our own throats with regards to stringent rules around heritage buildings and their repair, etc.? So just something on that. I'm just looking at places where we can try and perhaps get some more funding where it's needed rather than where it's not but really needed. Fourthly, just maybe it's more for CCHL, but with those, our family of companies, tax incentives for charity. So I'm wondering, could we at least look at that? Because if we're looking at the big picture, and I know it's probably, well, without question, it's outside this mandate, but I do think that would be something to think about as a team, as one family, looking at options there. And I guess the obviously one is there a way to streamline the current process that we have? And obviously I don't expect you to answer that now, but they're just some observations from this.
Yeah, thank you. Noted.
Thank you. Okay, good Scott. Right. Next, please.
Contestable community funds. We handed out a little information sheet earlier on. Mm-hmm. Really nothing in there that's not captured in this presentation. We just didn't want to make the PowerPoint too long, but you could also maybe have a look at the sums concerned while we're discussing the issue. So contestable community funds, there is a proposal to cut or make savings off or from some of these funds. Just to, as a way of introduction, contestable community funding, we do it because it's very transparent, it's in the open, it's elected member decided, it's efficient because it targets current initiatives very precisely for defined outcomes, and it's versatile. We'll look at the range, number, scope of what's funded from time to time. So there are some, there's some very good reasons why we do this, and that justifies us being in the business at in the first place. The funds that we're here to talk about are based on council's previous feedback: city placemaking, biodiversity, sustainability, noting that this fund concludes next year's the last year, heritage, the note that council have already made decisions reducing the value of that fund, and accessibility seed funding. In the handout, there's a brief Excel spreadsheet which advises councillors what's in the funds over the years on the annual plan of the LTP. Also on this slide, but through the discussion, councillors might want to refer to the handout. So there's some options for savings. Potential maximum saving is obviously closing all the funds. All those funds that we've referred to, and because of the different provisions in different years, the maximum saving will change. Conversely, there's the status quo, maintain the funds as is. They're all slightly inflation proofed. Again, no saving. Now there's some joy in between, depending on where councillors may want to go or not. And I guess some work staff have been doing. Staff believe there are alternatives for closing the placemaking fund, saving $342,000 per annum. That there's some alternatives in ending the sustainability fund, which has one more year to run. The principal alternatives are directing applicants to strengthening communities, which council has decided, indicated to date, not to lower, to keep and to inflation proof. Accessibility, there's $100,000 per year in seed funding. Alternatives exist, primarily including accessibility as it should be in the design and construction of our capital projects. So, for example, the South Library project, South Library and Service Centre, accessibility, major consideration. We don't envisage using anything from this fund to support that project. Biodiversity, staff do not recommend closing it for a number of reasons. You're halfway on the journey to weed control, you stop it now, the weeds grow back. Heritage, that's what we were told by the parks guys, and we believe them. You have to reach a crucial time, a crucial point when you can control your weeds, but we're not there. Same with possums and stoats and feral cats and everything else. Anyway, the heritage, as you see, a significant cut has already been made by council, so staff think probably should leave that one alone. So there's the option of cutting some funds. The other option council may wish to consider is reducing the funds. A 50% saving, results in $735,000 in 24-25, 601 25-26. Council could reduce selected funds. Council could reduce or cut for a set duration, maybe the next 2 years, to cover peak rates. So there are some levers that council can pull. As you see in the attached spreadsheet, there is a heritage incentive fund. The council made a significant cut on that in the last LTP. The heritage team, believe there is a case to possibly increase that, either by redirecting some savings, or by increasing the flexibility of other heritage funds to allow the heritage incentive fund, which essentially covers buildings, to be reinstated. Lastly, I guess there's a couple of high-level, broad-brush options that the team have come up with. Close the capital endowment fund, the mechanism, and rates fund 50% of the historic grants for 2 years, and then review. The saving on that is $3.3 million a year, $1.2 million from your borrowing mechanism, and $2.1 million from the saving in grants, 2 years. There are implications. The concerns that councillors have discussed this morning, service cuts, inability to respond to emerging priorities, and a reduction in support to the community and the volunteer sector. So nothing comes without a price. Additionally, close the city placemaking, sustainability and accessibility funds. and focus heritage funding on listed buildings and a heritage festival. The saving is $822,000 per annum the next year, and $442,000 onward. The differential is because the sustainability fund is due to end next year anyway, so you can't save what isn't there. And again, there are implications. Greater reliance on other contestable funding, such as the Strengthening Communities Fund. Reduction in funding equals drop in service. So I guess those are really elected member questions. There are a whole range of options. We've described some of the parameters, and we are happy to take any direction from council that council feel necessary to give.
Councillor Harrison-Hunt, please.
Kia ora, John. Just a quick question around the staff recs, and can we just quickly go, just for clarity, one by one in each one, and which ones you recommend to hold and which ones you recommend to move on?
Yep.
So you've got placemaking?
Yep.
Is that looking to be cut? Staff recs?
Our, for want of a better word, recommendation is to close that fund.
Okay.
Yep. Because alternatives exist.
Okay. And biodiversity?
Biodiversity, do not close that fund, maintain it.
Okay. Sustainability?
It has 1 year to run, close it now.
Okay. Heritage is a trimmed down, right?
Heritage, the recommendation is to maintain council's trimmed down version, but within the heritage pool, it's 2 or 3 little funds, allow those funds to be used for the preservation of buildings rather than intangible heritage items.
Got you. And accessibility to be cut?
To be cut, because we feel the onus should be on the building projects to include accessibility, not as a secondary consideration from a fund.
Makes complete sense. So then out of these funds, which ones are at capacity? Which ones have been met to the nearly the last dollar?
Every year we carry forward a very small percentage of our funding, so they're used.
Okay. Every single one of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
We also, a number of projects will be committed to in 1 year, but when you're dealing with third parties, they may not complete the whole project in a financial year, so there's some carry forwards through just a general project cycle. But as a rule, council's funding is well utilised. There's very little left. Any that is left is automatically carried forward to the next year and usually spent quite quickly.
Okay. And just some clarity on one of the funds. I just want to know a bit more about the placemaking one.
Yep.
In the handout, there's some really interesting projects in here.
Yep.
But can you sort of, it's a good description, but can you sort of define exactly what that's about?
More than the description here, I think you'd need a separate briefing, or we can supply some information.
Sure. Because you've got Rongoa Māori Trust, they've got some mahinga kai stuff, and then you've got a community garden, but then you move into a public wall display with interactive poetry.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So you see how it's sort of contrasting?
It is.
But it's really, really awesome.
It is very broad. It is intentionally wide, so the council or decision makers are not limited in scope on how they think. The applicants are not limited. If it meets the very broad criteria and the organisations are sustainable, the applications go to councillors and councillors consider the merits. So what you are seeing, and I think you're describing, is a very broad fund, which is, it's well used, but it's not targeted.
Okay.
It's kept broad for a reason. Isn't it?
Sounds lovely, doesn't it?
Yeah. We can certainly give you a more detailed breakdown of the grants.
Yeah.
Councillor Donovan, please.
Thanks, John.
Got it right, Councillor.
Thanks, John. The one there's a couple. Tyler answered or asked my question. I'm interested in finding out more about the City Placemaking Fund.
Yep.
Because I think it's useful to get a bit more information to see some of the scope of the projects.
We can do that. We can provide a breakdown of the projects, the amounts, certainly. very useful.
especially those that might be in train at the moment. I know that Life in Vacant Spaces has got some things that are underway, which link into some other projects with the urban regeneration work in terms of some of the areas. The other one is around the biodiversity fund. I see that there is an increase, but I'm just wondering what that's based on. What does that look like in practice? So, for example, if we are looking at responding to the climate emergency by looking at putting more resources into in a strategy around, the ecological response, what do we need to be doing to make sure we're not going backwards? And I'm aware with the National Policy Statement on Indigenous biodiversity that perhaps we haven't quite sort of caught up with some of the requirements under that. So I just want to make sure that the fund is going to be fit for purpose for the future.
Again, we will have to come back to you on that. This required a bit more analysis, more detailed information.
And just final question around that. With the Jobs for Nature funding, potentially not being available, where will the gaps fall? Are we going to face gaps in areas that have been kind of covered through other sources of funding? Because there would be a real risk that if we're relying on external sources of funding and then we're kind of not picking up the slack in some of those areas, then we will, at that stage, be going backwards.
Perhaps our General Manager, Andrew.
So the Jobs for Nature funding does run out at the end of this financial year, but it's being extended through the use of the Better Off funding and through until that terminates in June 2027. And so that buys us a little bit of time in terms of how we can respond into the future.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Templeton, please.
Thank you. So some time ago in the LTP questions, I sent through one asking about the funds that we had previously done on a short-term basis, which would be drawing to a close soon. I was unable to open the document in that, so I worked through the IT staff who ended up also not being able to open up the document that was attached to my laptop, and so they printed me out the document. Sustainability Fund isn't in the printout I have. That doesn't mean to say it's not on the answer. But if it had been, I'd have put an amendment in to maintain the Sustainability Fund as it is ongoing.
I have seen an amendment that I've answered on that, Councillor. I obviously didn't come from you, but I certainly have informed that.
There is one. That's good. The other thing that people should remember as well is that there were other funds that are coming to a close now. So when we're looking at closing these ones, these aren't the only funds that we've had. So in the last LTP, we put in an environmental partnership fund of $350,000 a year. That will be coming to an end. We also had a community partnership fund of $350,000 a year. That will be coming to an end. So that's already quite a significant drop in the funding that's going to be available for that type of work that's happening. And so I'm just really wary of cutting these funds to groups who do really, really good work in our city, and it's work that they do off the smell of an oily rag that we would have to pay a lot more to do if we wanted that kind of work done. So,
Councillor Peters.
Thank you. Slightly different tack on my question. It's around the accessibility fund, and certainly understand the idea of pushing that onus back onto project level. And I just want to make sure that we're not going to lose any sort of view and momentum on ensuring that our accessibility thoughts continue, and we don't want to lose any ground in that space. So I'm just a little bit concerned about cutting the idea of doing those audits and not find a way of entrenching to make sure that that does actually happen. So.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Please go to the summary option for discussion page. The second one down, so saving 822. So those combined, assuming the part about heritage funding refers to dropping from 547k a year to 209, they add up to 1.16 million. Is the reason it just says saving of 822 and then 442 onward because they aren't all budgeted for future years? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, but the grand total.
We can't save stuff we haven't budgeted for.
Okay. Gotcha.
Peter won't let me.
Cool. But all adds up to 1.1.
tries
Gotcha.
every year.
Thank you very much.
Good on you. Councillor Cotter, then Councillor Johansson.
Mine's supplementary to Councillor Templeton. I was thinking about the Environmental Partnership Fund because I think that's where we funded the park rangers from. So
Yeah, they're permanent.
so they're okay, they're safe. Okay, and so all right. So have you requested more information on those two funds then, Sarah? The Environmental Partnership and the Community Partnership Fund.
It's it's somewhere in the question stuff, and it says what they've been used for and the value of them so far.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johansson, please.
So if we're inflation adjusting the strengthening communities funding, how much extra funding are we putting into that, and how does that compare to the funding cuts proposed for these ones?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So if we're inflation adjusting the strengthening communities fund,
yes,
then obviously we're putting in a significant amount of money.
I'll have to go and look at the fund and let you know exactly
So I'm trying to
what that
understand the
means.
difference between the funding that are proposed to be cut outside of the endowment one, which I think is separate, but versus the additional money we're putting in. And then the other thing is
These are net savings.
yeah.
Okay.
But for the city placemaking, I guess I'm really struggling at how a local community garden gets funded through that, not through like the local community board. And it like I just kind of wonder like how do you choose what goes to a community board and what goes to these other funds?
I said that the city placemaking is intentionally very, very broad. There's two filters, if you like. Certainly the funding process, and a lot of time the inherently local projects will be directed to a community board. Sometimes they're locally based projects with a more of a metropolitan field, and they will go to placemaking. Secondly, it's elected member scrutiny on looking at the applications, and sometimes elected members in your committee and others, Yanni, will say, well, actually this belongs with a community board, or this is the domain of the government.
Right.
We need to ask more questions.
So who makes the decision around city placemaking? Because that's not something that comes to us as elected members. Is there a small group? Or?
There are two smaller funds in there. One's staff managed and the other's elected member decision making.
Right.
And I will tell you which one's which. Maybe I haven't gone to that level of detail. Josh, which one's elected member?
The place partnership and
Place Partnership's elected member. We'll get back to you with the with the other one, how that's
I
decided.
guess I wonder if one of the options is actually just getting the community boards to fund the local stuff. So giving some more to community boards and saying, will you fund these locally? But I really struggle with that community garden getting funding out of there. Seems very odd.
Here's I do agree with you, Yanni, and here's a wee bit of thought that I had. After the Better Off funding, we gave all the community boards $500,000, but it was spread over 3 years.
Yep.
If we get
almost all,
some of the more gave them that money. If, for argument's sake, we gave them all $500,000 a year each going forward, or a bit more, could all of these funds go away? And just following on from what Councillor Johansson said, then that community garden in maybe your area could come to you and you say, yes, we'll look after that. And it takes a lot of grief off you. And then you'd let all the com boards do all the running around with this if they had the money to play with it. Just saying. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make life easy for you.
The decision making as close as possible to the community affected by that decision making, subsidiarity, is it's a proven success in decision making. Phil, we would have to get back to you and give you a little bit more advice. The principle works very well. But we would, rather than making a broad brush call now,
Oh, no, I'm not saying, yeah, I'm just
yeah.
throwing it out there. Okay. Councillor Coker.
Me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was just going to comment on that. I was just going to say, like, things like heritage might fall more in the central city, so allocating evenly across the city funds may not be a fair way of doing it. And biodiversity is a lot along the Bort Hills in particular areas, but not other areas. So the money's sort of citywide, in my view.
You're holding us up from a cup of coffee, Councillor Donovan, but far away.
I was just going to agree with Councillor Coker in that also with the way that funding currently works in some areas, it's sort of there is an equity lens applied. So if we do a flat distribution, there could be some issues there. So I'd be a bit concerned.
So you're saying, no, I don't know. Okay, right, what have we got? Thank you, because we've got property next, is that right? That's right. You're done, John?
Yes.
So what say we say 11:15 back here, please, everybody? Thank you. Sorry, we're a couple of minutes late. Okay, property disposal. Bruce, good to see you, mate.
So we wanted today just to talk and make sure through this briefing that we've covered all the process matters related to the properties that require decisions through this LTP. So we've got a draft list prepared which will be circulating shortly. Those properties that we've added to that draft list have essentially been identified from work we did through a Three Waters review when the Three Waters reform was still happening, and then that have come through and been recommended by our Parks unit as they've been working through their Port Hills residential red zone planning. We've then assessed all of those properties against Council's retention criteria, and I'll remind those who've been around for a while and also for those who are new what those retention criteria are shortly, our needs and risks. And I'm particularly focusing on risks for the Port Hills properties. They were required from a risk management perspective. The ones that we are looking at are ones that risk has been assessed and there have been actions taken or actions that could be taken that means that risk is mitigated sufficiently that we can sell. And some of those actions might be subdividing the properties, so consolidating two properties, subdividing off parts of that can be built on from parts that need to be retained because of the risk factor. So that work is done. So in terms of the retention criteria, the council approved in December 2020 the following retention criteria. And I'll let you read that rather than read it out, but I'll just draw your attention to some specifics. So one of them in that second point, we try and look at all the values associated with land. And I know that from time to time we might be concerned about things like biodiversity or heritage value. We do take all of that into account in those criteria and assess those. One of the particular ones we've been looking at this time has been thinking about it with a climate change lens, looking ahead to see where we might have properties that actually from an operational perspective doesn't make sense to own, but applying that climate change lens means that actually there's a case to retain or handle in a different way. So in terms of, you don't necessarily see those properties coming through because we eliminate them at an earlier stage of the process. So those are those retention criteria. So we started with a long list of 80 properties, and through the work we've done internally, we've now reduced that to 47 properties, of which 40 are in the Port Hills residential red zone. One of the areas that we have had issues before has been when there are properties that have got community facilities on them that our community facilities planning has identified we no longer need. However, once we've got through processes and even sometimes after decisions, there has been a desire to review and revisit those decisions. So there are no properties like that in this list. So that takes out one of those areas that may cause you concern through the process there. So that should make life a lot easier once that consultation's occurring. We know that there will be questions raised about looking at the Port Hills residential red zone, in particular that question that has arisen on several occasions in the past about offering these back first to those who previously owned them. Our advice remains the same. We don't believe that we should do that. It's very difficult to do that, to identify where people are now and to contact them, albeit there is some high-level mechanisms we could use. There's been the expiration of time and people will have moved on, and this may cause some issues for them. Another is really to think about what I described when we described mitigating that risk. These aren't the same properties. We will be subdividing a lot of these to take out the risk areas and then consolidating to put saleable building lots in. So they're not the same properties that people sold originally. So we would still recommend that we don't do that process. People will still get the same chance to purchase because we put these on the open market, and they've just got as much right as anyone else to bid for them through that process. Finally, the next steps, we're just going through the final internal circulation of the list to make sure that all units, we've had a number of units involved to date, but not every unit of council. We're giving every unit of council that chance to just do a final check. And then we would start the normal process of circulation that we do every time we run this process, sending these to the list of the community boards, to each of the papatia runanga, to Ngāi Tahu, to community housing providers and Kāinga Ora, given your policies around housing as well. And then this will come through to council for final approval of the list as part of the draft LTP and approval for the consultation document. What I haven't mentioned is probably some of the larger ones that are more one-off processes. This process is more about that housekeeping, exercise, regular, making sure that our portfolio is fit for purpose. So you're dealing with much smaller lots. There are some larger ones that we know are coming up. For instance, we're currently out for consultation over parts of the Diamond Harbour land, and we're consulting on potential disposal of parts of that for a school and a fire station. Those we're running as separate processes, and there are a number of other sites that are separate processes that we will come to you throughout the year with those. And so some of you may have questions about those. They will be coming, but they won't be included in the LTP at this point in time.
Okay.
All right, at that point I'll pause for questions.
Right, well, I do want to get wrapped up on this, the next one and the next one by noon if I can. Councillor Templeton and Councillor Johansson, but if we can keep them short, that'd be good.
Yeah, thanks. Just two quick things. Firstly, noting that the Waihoro Community Board was against the Port Hills properties being included at this stage and wanted a Port Hills red zone holistic plan for the future before individual properties were sold off, and that hasn't.
So we've sent a memo in response to that and circulated that.
Yeah, I'm just
I got
noting
no
it publicly.
further feedback from councillors on that.
Yeah, so that was declined, but we, as a board, were keen for that to happen. There's a lot to happen in that area, and the Avon Takaro River Corridor Red Zone had a very comprehensive, holistic plan before any decisions were made. The other one is that we have a previous council resolution on Offerback, and while they might have slightly different boundaries, the land is the same that people used to live on. Will we have to rescind that resolution as part of this?
Yes, when we did that, if there are any of those that are impacted, because it was a specific list.
This is a specific list,
Yep.
Given they're similar.
So we did sue some of that when we first did this as part of last year's annual plan, and there was a rescission motion included as part of the council decision there, and then we'd be looking to do the same if there are any of the same. And Angus is working through doing that cross-matching.
Trying to find people is really difficult, but is there a way of, within the process, prioritising, if you like, offers from previous owners, should they arise, as opposed to having to find the people who used to own it?
Yeah. So this, I'll respond with a question. I hate doing this, but I'll respond with a question. If you get this scenario where a previous owner offers less than somebody else, which should we prioritise? And that is essentially the question that we need to be considering in there. So if council directed us, we could certainly do that, but at the moment we generally look at trying to maximise the return from these properties.
Yeah, I'd like something to be worked up that does look like, I mean, when you look at these properties and their potential value, if there was a small difference in price, I think that personally, if the person who used to live there and was red zoned and was told that they couldn't live there wanted to come back, they should be given some preference.
Yep. We can certainly write up an option for consideration on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yanni, please.
Yeah, I mean, as the councillor at the time of the earthquakes who represented this area, I have a similar point of view around just I feel very uncomfortable selling people's homes on the open market to the highest bidder.
Land.
Land, places where people had their homes. I personally would like to see what thought can be given to how we deal with that. And I just kind of wonder if we know what the cost of mitigation has been, because there's also residents who we enabled to stay who half funded contributions to remediation so that they could stay. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to kind of look at an equity across that.
Okay. Right. Moving. Yeah.
Clarify. So would we consult on selling to, if we were to dispose of that property, would we consult on selling it for a lower value if there's a preference on that? I'm just thinking because it obviously has an impact on every ratepayer in the city.
Yeah.
So would we need to consult on that, I would imagine?
We haven't worked up the option yet, so I can't say what we would need to be consulting on there, but we'll think all those matters through when we work that option up.
Yeah, I guess if advice does come back, though, it would need to reflect that it's currently a city asset, isn't it, in terms of it being owned by everyone. And, albeit what happened at that time, they were paid out, even though they didn't necessarily agree with it. Then it is that
And
as well.
if you sell it through a land agent, it's up to them to do the donkey work with the person that may have owned it, or the price, all that sort of thing, and just present it to you, so it keeps you out of the meat.
I think before we even get to that point, we have to come back to council to get a decision on what the process is, because we won't all be agreeing to this. So, I realise that, but we're going around the table.
But we don't want to lose sight of, we're in the financial doldrums. We've got some assets that aren't strategic that we can sell. Let's sell them. Let's not make it too hard for Bruce and his team to be able to get rid of them. We can put all these hurdles, and not say hurdles, all these ideas in place. It just will be going on and on forever. So thank you, Bruce. Good-o. What have we got next? Katie.
Kia ora koutou. So just quickly to go through the consultation document. So it's going to be themed around the findings from what matters most, but also acknowledging that a lot of what we heard from that was also very similar to what we heard in resident surveys. It has the sections that you would expect to see within the consultation document there, but we're really taking on board some of our learnings from previous LTPs and annual plans. So a real focus there on plain language, infographics where we can make things easier to understand, and definitely less is more. So trying to make it as succinct as a document as we possibly can. We're also looking for options to create sort of like an A4 flyer synopsis. Now the process for options for consultation will be covered later in this presentation. But in terms of advertising, we intend to be going out with an advertising campaign to support this. We'll be making the most of video this time around as well. And we're working with governance teams, your governance teams, to work out our opportunities in the community over the consultation period. So quite happy to make up some time for you here, with the timing.
Right, we've got some Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Could I just confirm that there will be a version that can be printed on paper to bring to people without internet,
Absolutely.
etc.?
There's always a print run with
Nice
this.
one.
There'll be hard copies in libraries and service centres, and a certain amount will be printed in excess of that. We don't tend to go overboard on that, but we'll, if you have a particular need, then we can absolutely print some more. What we do like to do is do more of a print run of, say, a folded A3 into an A4, something that's more easily taken to a community event that references online. And we also print the submission forms separately, so that that we can sort of like have more of them than the consultation
Yeah, sorry, it was a
document.
submission form. So
Oh, it's a submission form. Oh yeah, nope, all sorted.
Yeah, nice. There'll be a version that we can print off as that. Nice.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Lovely.
good question. Councillor Henstock, please.
Two things. Just going back to the A4 flyer synopsis. Is that what you were saying? The A3
Well,
folded
A3
in half?
folded into A4, sort of like a four-sided. We've done that previously in the past for LTPs. just as a bit of a, here are the key points, here where you go to for more information.
And some of those can be made available to us as elected members to take to some of our public drop-in sessions and things like that.
Absolutely. So we do a bigger print run of that kind of carry on for the very reason that it's easier to print.
Yeah, and my second one is in relation to the larger print, having liaised with a number of residents over the annual plan. Large print document is a real issue for some of the elderly people. Will there be one of those available, or some available in each of the libraries, please?
We will definitely, I'll have to come back to you, but we will definitely look into that, along with Easy Read is another thing that we're trying to...
Sure. Thank you.
Councillor Johansson, please.
Yeah, I was just interested in what ward-based information we'll be able to get around what's happening, and also we were sort of supposed to have some discussion about a sort of Eastern improvement plan, and that was supposed to inform the draft LTP. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be anything tailored around that stuff that we talked about post wastewater treatment plant in terms of the engagement.
So we'll need to come back to you on the Eastern plan. I know there is work underway on that, but I'm not quite clear as to timing. So I will take that on board and come back to you.
The resolution was pretty clear about timing. Yeah. So, and what about the ward-based information?
So there will be ward-based information available online.
We get that in hard copy.
So that's something I can take offline.
Yeah. And I think just the feedback. I mean, I think the libraries are a really great way of engaging people, but there does need to be some thought, I guess, as to how do you easily display the information in a way that people can kind of understand and see. But like one idea I've put forward in the past is maybe there could be submission stations at each library, which is kind of, maybe has some of the branding and maybe some big kind of flags or something highlighting that people could go and have their say there. But just, I just would be quite interested in what we can do to get that local information to people as best as possible, just away from just being online. Cool, okay. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Katie, and sorry for these conversations always get more detail than probably you're after. Two things. This may capture a different audience to those who participated in what matters most, the original engagement, and who might have seen the feedback. Do we do a little bit of a recap to remind people what the community said and that we've done something already?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Yep. I know, because I know we were short on space and things, but that's really important. And the other thing is that one key piece of feedback that we get every consultation is from people going, I didn't bother because they never changed their minds, it's all predetermined. And the phrase that's on here currently, this is the little sorry thing, is changes may be made as a result of the submissions we receive. Now, I can't think of an annual or long-term plan where we haven't made gazillions of changes based on the submissions. Well, no, gazillions clearly, but lots of changes. And I'm wondering if we could actually say, every year we make changes based on the submissions rather than just we might.
Yep.
Because actually we do. Yes. Thanks.
Good. Councillor Harrison-Hunt, please.
Kia ora, Katie. I just wanted to just quickly touch on that localism point, and I'm wondering if we can take a few things offline around ward-based things. There is a resolution that I've put in around citizens' assemblies on the back of the Riccarton Collective, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about it, maybe in a briefing, the next one that you may be looking to doing.
Yep, absolutely. We have provided some staff feedback back on to that that we can provide to you, and happy to take that offline as well. I think citizens' assemblies, we have perhaps run out of time for that in this piece, but would like to talk to you about the outcomes that you'd like to achieve with the citizen assembly, and maybe we have some other tactics out there that we could do.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Excellent. And Councillor McDonald.
Hey, thanks. Mine's real belts and braces as well. It's probably not so much on the content. I'm just really practically, can we have something in a format that can go into letterboxes? So, like, I know when I have had public meetings and that, I like to drop something off, and it's really helpful to be able to put in the form at the same time. So can we have the team design something that is easy to put into letterboxes?
For absolute clarity there, are we talking about something that lets people know that consultation is happening?
No, I think we probably need. I'm just thinking about how people
Or-
access information. So a lot of people use online, but there'd be a lot of people, particularly I'm thinking of my area where they aren't necessarily online.
Yep.
You know, can we have a bit of a synopsis of the LTP, somewhere where they can go where it says, you know, go to the Fendleton Library or wherever.
So there
but
is-
then on the back of it, their ability to submit. Yeah.
So just from a practicality point, and we really are getting into the detail here, the submission
I'm
form is...
not trying to solve it for you. All I'm saying is I want something I can put into letterboxes.
Sure.
Yeah.
No problems. We can look at that.
Excellent. Councillor Cotter?
I'd just like to see, instead of our proposed plan, proposed long-term plan, I'd like to see the long-term plan rather than just plan. That's just a comment there.
So are we just looking at that graphic there?
Yeah.
Immediately regretting popping that in there, just very draft. That was just as an example of, it's not the words, yeah.
And then also when you're looking at the proposed residential rate increase 24 to 25, and you might say and the following annual increases.
Yeah.
Cool.
Councillor Moore?
Oh, wait a minute. Just to point, as soon as you say the words long-term plan, you've just lost about 3/4 of the public. They don't know what that means. When you add the word 10-year budget, they now know what you mean. So just another note to...
And you could put both.
Yeah,
A long-term
100%.
plan,
Yep.
10-year budget, yeah.
Yeah, just as a thought and my general experience.
Yeah.
On the sections we're asked the questions, so in the past what I've seen is, what are your views on our infrastructure strategy? And people thinking, I don't know what your infrastructure strategy is. I'm wondering if you would add any plain language to those questions. So, financial strategy. Is there some plain words that can sort of draw a comment out of them? Well, because of course they're not going to go and necessarily often read the 30-page financial strategy. Sorry, 200 pages. Yeah, thank you.
I would assume you'd put a link in there to them?
Absolutely, yep.
Good. Councillor Kewen and then Councillor Peters. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that not just what questions we're asking, well, that is important, but also how we ask them, because a lot of the feedback that came back in the What Matters Most stuff last year just didn't relate at all to almost any of the feedback I get in my ward. What matters the most that normally gets brought up is roads, and our surveys tell us that. And next was the cost of our rates going up, and the number of people that spend all year whinging about that, but then we don't hear from them during the LTP or the 10-year budget. Is so those people, and they always say, like you say there, it doesn't matter what I say, the council isn't going to change their mind or listen anyway, because their rates will still go up by a dramatic amount. So how do we get all of those people that complain to engage with us?
Do a letterbox drop, let's
Yeah, and then
got something
at the end of
fantastic
it,
to
and then
yeah.
at the end of it, if their rates go up by 15%, then they can go, you see, they don't listen, and that would then reinforce it, which would be good for the following year.
It's a difference between listening and making a decision.
Thank you. Councillor Johansson?
Yeah, I'm going to lose my house. It doesn't matter.
I was just wondering, because the complete mess of all the transport projects, the transport choices, the CRAF, I'm just wondering how we are going to sort of consult and engage on that, given that we've had some engagement, we've made some decisions to defer, some to bring forward. Is there kind of a section that's going to kind of try and easily explain what the trade-offs are in terms of those projects? Because we're not getting briefed to the 29th of February, which is probably going to be quite late to inform the consultation document.
Do you want to talk to that?
It's not overly helpful to criticise the transport team when they can't defend themselves. I mean,
fair
the reality
commentary.
is we've consulted on this stuff and
So
it's
I
in
wasn't,
budgets
I wasn't
already.
I wasn't trying to insult the transport team. I was just asking if it was possible or how we're going to engage around I'll give you the classic example, the Ferry Road pedestrian crossing. We've had about 5 years of submissions of the community coming in saying, can we please have a safe pedestrian crossing? People have been killed. This is a priority. I'm just wondering, how are we going to engage with the whole changes because of the transport choices and the CRAF over budgets in terms of this process? Because it seems like this is the place where we should have that conversation with people. And I'm just wondering how we're going to do that.
So if I can make a general, as Jane explained earlier, this is actually going to be quite a challenging process because of the national government priority changes during the course of the consultation process. So I think what we can do is explain how we've got to where we've got to, what the proposed capital program is, but there will need to be some level of caveat saying this could change as a result of national government priorities. So it is going to be challenging. That said, if communities have already identified and consistently done so that there are certain projects or initiatives that are priorities, there is nothing to prevent them from putting those forward. So the council will still get a very strong flavour of what the community priorities are and can take that into account in your final decisions.
Yep, good call.
Section on those transport projects specifically? That's my question, like in terms of the consultation document.
There is on the website, so we can reference that within the consultation document.
Just add that the public aren't interested in what fund something comes from necessarily. They want the project done.
That's right.
So they'd be keen to consult on the project.
So why would you consult on it?
But to go and tell the tell the public about multiple different funds is going to confuse them even further on.
Because we need to add additional budget to do the projects that people think are going to happen. And if they don't know that they won't happen unless we add additional funding, they might not make submissions saying that that's what they like.
But it'll be a priority from your community board, so.
Yep, that's good. Councillor Peters.
No, my question's been asked, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Hunt.
No, I'm good too. I'm good.
Okie dokie.
Thank you.
Great. Well done, Kate.
Peter.
Right.
Welcome
Okay,
back.
I too have got some belts and braces, and there's one or two impromptu things that came up yesterday that we'd like a steer from you on. So I realise we're tight for time. You want to close at 12, don't you?
There's some stuff that Lynn wants to talk to us about.
Okay, I'm going to move at pace through some of the housekeeping to get to the new bit. These numbers have since been superseded. There are 213 questions, 200 answered, 13 being chased. We know that some of you have had issues with using the link, and we're working on that. So you should hear back from staff today, I believe. In terms of the amendments process, yep, that's a big number. We're working through financial, legal and risk advice on those. It is a lot to get through, so we'll move as fast as we can, but the complex ones we need to get right. So I can't give you a single date. It'll vary according to the complexity. The process is that they'll be moved, seconded, debated and voted on the 14th as part of the adoption meeting, as you'd expect. If it's already in the draft, that will be identified and taken care of through the Mayor's Recs. The other amendments are either agreed to or not agreed to, depending on your show of hands. And for substantive proposals, you may opt to go out and consult and obtain feedback and then debate for the final. Next steps. Okay, this is where it gets a little, I need to ask for your patience on this, because while it seems a bit boring, it will affect your quality of life and ours over the next few months. Those dates were all planned last year. There's been a lot of complexity since then. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't meet them. It does mean that we need to think carefully about how things go from here. The agenda for audit and risk is the 2nd of February. That's just over a week away. The agenda for council, Go Live, is the 9th. So again, not many working days to go. Now, apologies that this isn't really on the agenda, but we had some developments yesterday afternoon talking to...
Peter, can I just check in as to whether you're going to cover those now, or are we going to cover them separately?
Whenever you like. I'm quite happy to.
So I'm wondering whether we just pause at the moment and seek any questions on the steps that have been put up on the board.
Councillor Templeton.
Thanks. Apart from our own kind of internal bits and pieces, do we have any risks to the process currently about it getting through and us landing an LTP. Like, you know, we've had a lot of change in the organisation, a whole range of bits and pieces. Do we have risks currently? And if we do, what's been done to mitigate those?
So, Peter, do you want to answer, or do you want me to answer?
No, I'm happy to field that. Look, we have a financial strategy which you've had an oversight of. We have an infrastructure strategy. We have a framework for a CD. We have activity and asset plans. We have a capital program. The risks lie around finalising those things in time because of the due dates, and audits response times, because we can't adopt, and this may be new to some councillors, we can't adopt the LTP without receiving audit's opinion on the LTP. So we have to give them enough bandwidth to assimilate all of that stuff and provide a view. And if they haven't had enough time, they can't, which means we can't adopt. So that's the risk.
And have they got restrictions at the moment? I mean, I think last year there were issues with that.
I think it's less restrictive than last year, but it's nonetheless, it's a lot of stuff to soak up in a short space of time.
Yeah.
The audit team started with us yesterday in council as the large group.
Yeah.
So they need to get through all of this in order to provide a view to us.
Cool, thanks.
But there are some other possibilities there.
Kia ora, Peter. Just a quick question on the 26th of Jan. So I did raise this just previously about the zero budget on my parks and communities in my ward. And the chat was that the Riccarton projects are in the metro budget and they are yet to be moved into the Riccarton one to be put into that budget line. I'm having a bit of difficulty with that, and I'm wondering when I'm going to be able to see when those metro budgets get moved to that Riccarton line before we adopt a long-term plan, because I can't chop and change anything if I don't have anything. Do you sort of get what I'm saying?
I do. I actually wonder if that's something we shouldn't specifically address with you offline.
Cool.
Not in terms of the overall CD and that kind of thing, but to address your concerns specifically and now, so that you're comfortable with where the process is going.
Yep. Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure. No worries. Yep. That's cool. Thanks.
Councillor Henstock, please.
Very basic question. Apologies, I might have missed it. You keep referring to CD options. What's CD?
Sorry, consultation document.
Thank you. I should know that. Thanks.
I'll try to dodge the acronym. Sorry about that.
That's right, a lot to take up on the first day back. We done?
I think we're done.
Okay, that's all cool. So we'll do this.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the end of where we're at, and thank you very much for their attendance and staff who have been very helpful in explaining things. So we now have a karakia to close this part of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Kia whakairea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūriki whakataka ai, kia tūriki whakataka ai. Hurry, hurry,
Thank you very much.